They told us the West was one with gunpowder and grit. They lied. It was one with ink, deceit, and the blood of those who dared to stand up when the law sat down. In 1883, Wyoming, a widow named Clara Daltrey thought she was fighting a simple land dispute. She was wrong. She was standing in the center of a conspiracy that would burn her town to the ground. But she made one mistake. She misjudged the man the locals called the Wolf. When Elias Thorne grabbed her by the waist and growled, "You walk away when I'm done talking," everyone thought it was an act of aggression. They had no idea it was the only thing keeping her alive. This is the story of the lawless justice that history books tried to erase. The Wyoming wind didn't just blow. It scoured. It carried the grit of the red earth and the metallic tang of the dried creek beds that gave the town of Copper Creek its name. For Clara Daltrey, that wind felt like a constant reminder that she was unwanted. It had been 6 months since her husband, Henry, had been found face down in the irrigation ditch. The local sheriff, a man named Josiah Parkey, a man with a smile like a cracked tombstone, had ruled it an accident. "Drunk," Park had said, spitting tobacco onto Clara's porch. "Slipped and fell. Tragic." But Henry Daltrey didn't drink. Clara stood on the porch of the homestead they had built with their own hands. She was a woman of African descent in a territory that was barely tolerant of her presence, let alone her ownership of 300 acres of prime grazing land. She adjusted the high collar of her black dress, the fabric hot against her neck in the midday sun. She wasn't just grieving. She was under siege. Every week brought a new threat. First, the fences were cut, then a poisoned well. Now, the bank, specifically the territorial trust run by Thaddeus Vance, was claiming a lien on the property that Clara knew didn't exist. "Mrs. Daltrey!" The shout came from the dusty road. Clara shielded her eyes. A buckboard wagon was pulling up, kicked up a cloud of choking dust. Driving it was Thaddeus Vance himself, a man who wore suits that cost more than Clara's house and sweated through them within the hour. But it wasn't Vance that made Clara's breath hitch. It was the man riding a massive roan gelding beside the wagon. He was known only as Thorne. Elias Thorne. The town gossip, Mrs. Gable, claimed Thorne was a half-breed savage brought in from the Oklahoma territories to handle Vance's messy work. His father had been a white trapper, his mother Cherokee. In Copper Creek, that made him two things: dangerous and untrustworthy. He wore his black hair long, tied back with a leather thong, and unlike the cowboys who slouched in their saddles, Thorne sat with a rigid, predatory stillness. Vance climbed down, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "Clara, I trust you've reconsidered my offer?" "It wasn't an offer, Thaddeus. It was robbery," Clara said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "And my name is Mrs. Daltrey." Vance chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. "We found the paperwork, Clara. Henry took a loan against the deed 2 years back. For improvements." "Henry never took a loan. We built this barn with lumber we cut ourselves," Clara retorted. She looked at the man on the horse. Elias Thorne was staring at her. His eyes were dark, unreadable, and devoid of the mockery she saw in Vance's face. He rested one hand on the pommel of his saddle, near the heavy Colt revolver at his hip. "Paperwork doesn't lie," Vance said, his voice hardening. "You have until Friday to vacate. If you don't, I'll have Sheriff Park evict you, and you know Park isn't gentle with your kind." "My kind?" Clara stepped off the porch, fury overcoming her fear. "You mean honest people? "Get off my land, Vance." Vance signaled to Thorne. "Elias, teach her some manners." Clara froze. The stories about Thorne were terrifying. They said he had tracked a man across the Badlands for 3 weeks just to collect a $50 bounty. They said he didn't speak much, and when he did, it was usually the last thing you heard. Elias Thorne nudged his horse forward. The animal snorted, its massive chest pushing against the wooden railing of the porch. Thorne looked down at Clara. Up close, she saw a scar running through his left eyebrow. "Friday," Thorne said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "Be gone by Friday." "Or what?" Clara challenged, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You'll shoot a widow?" Thorne leaned down, his face inches from hers. The smell of leather, sage, and gun oil filled her senses. "Or you'll lose more than the house." He wheeled the horse around sharply, dust kicking up into Clara's face. Vance laughed, climbed back into his wagon, and the two men rode off, leaving Clara coughing in the dirt, humiliated and terrified. She didn't see Thorne look back. She didn't see the way his hand hovered over his gun. Not in threat, but in a spasm of tension, as if he were fighting an urge to draw it right then and there. 2 days later, Clara rode into town. She wasn't going to flee. She was going to fight. She had found an old tin box under the floorboards of the barn, containing Henry's ledger. It detailed every cent they had spent. If Henry had taken a loan, it would be in there. It wasn't. She headed straight for the land office, a small clapboard building next to the saloon. The town was busy. Cowboys from the Triple Bar Ranch were drinking on the boardwalks, and women in bonnet hats hurried past, pulling their skirts away from the mud. As Clara tied her horse, she felt eyes on her. It was the same heavy atmosphere she felt everywhere in Copper Creek. The weight of being different, of being a woman alone, of being black in a town run by white men who feared losing their grip. She entered the office. The clerk, a nervous man named Mr. Abernathy, looked up and paled. "Mrs. Daltrey, I can't help you today." "You haven't even heard what I need," Clara said, slamming the ledger onto the counter. "I have proof Henry never took that loan. I want to see the original deed, the one in the safe." Abernathy's eyes darted to the door. "The deed is unavailable. Mr. Vance has it for review." "Vance is a banker, not the government," Clara shouted. "Is there a problem here?" The voice came from the doorway. It was Thaddeus Vance, smelling of whiskey and cigars. Flanking him were two of his hired hands, rough men with cruel eyes. And behind them, leaning against the doorframe, was Elias Thorne. "Mr. Abernathy was just explaining that you're confused," Vance said smoothly. "Grief does terrible things to the mind." "My mind is fine," Clara snapped. "You forged that signature, Vance. Henry's handwriting. He had a tremor in his right hand from the war. The signature on your notice is smooth." The room went silent. Vance's smile vanished. He hadn't expected her to be that observant. He stepped closer, invading her space. "You're making dangerous accusations, Clara. In this town, accusing a man of standing like me, well, it could be seen as slander. Sheriff Park might have to lock you up until you calm down." One of the hired hands, a man named Skinner, chuckled and reached out to grab Clara's arm. "Come on, gal. Let's get you some fresh air." Clara jerked her arm back. "Don't touch me." She shoved past Skinner, desperate to get to the door. She needed to get to the telegraph office in the next town over. She needed a federal marshal. Copper Creek was a trap. She made it to the boardwalk, the bright sun blinding her for a moment. She turned toward her horse, her boots thudding on the wood. Suddenly, a hand clamped onto her waist. It wasn't a clumsy grab. It was iron hard and precise. The force of it spun her around, pulling her violently back into the shadow of the building's overhang. It was Elias Thorne. The town square went quiet. People stopped to watch. The Cherokee wolf had the widow. "Let me go," Clara screamed, struggling against his grip. She raised her hand to strike him, but he caught her wrist with effortless speed. He pulled her closer, his body blocking her from the street, blocking her from Vance and Skinner, who were just stepping out of the office. To the onlookers, it looked like an assault. It looked like Vance's enforcer was manhandling the defiant woman. "You walk away when I'm done talking," Elias snarled, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. He shook her slightly, his face a mask of rage. Clara gasped, looking up into his dark eyes, expecting to see violence. But she didn't. Up close, shielded by the brim of his hat and the angle of his body, she saw something else. His eyes weren't angry. They were urgent, desperate. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear, looking for all the world like he was threatening her life. But his whisper was barely audible, a rapid-fire stream of breath. "The cinch on your saddle is cut, 2 inches from the buckle. You ride out now. It snaps at the gallop, and Skinner drags you." Clara froze. Her eyes widened. Elias pulled back slightly, raising his voice again for the audience. "You think you can just waltz in here and make demands?" He shoved her back against the wall, hard enough to make a sound, but his hand cushioned the impact against the wood at the last second. He leaned in again, shouting insults, but the whisper returned. "Go to the livery. Take the gray mare in the back stall. Tell the boy Red Feather sent me. Go to the old mining ridge. Wait for me." He released her waist, but kept her pinned with his gaze. "Now get out of my sight before I lose my temper." Clara stood there, her chest heaving. She looked at her horse. From where she stood, everything looked normal. But then she saw it, a tiny fray in the leather girth, just hidden by the stirrup leather. If she had galloped away in a panic, the saddle would have slipped, and she would have been trampled or dragged. She looked at Vance, who was smirking on the boardwalk, arms crossed. He was waiting for the show. He was waiting for her to die in an accident on the way home. Clara looked back at Elias. His face was stone, the perfect picture of a ruthless hired gun. But his right hand, hanging by his side, twitched, a single finger pointing imperceptibly toward the livery stable. "You're an animal," Clara said, playing the part, though her voice shook with a new kind of adrenaline. "I've been called worse." Elias spat. He turned his back on her, facing Vance. "She's leaving, boss. I made sure she understands the stakes." Vance nodded, satisfied. "Good work, Elias." Clara didn't run to her horse. She walked, stiff-backed and trembling, toward the livery stable, leaving her own horse tied to the rail. She felt the eyes of the town on her back, but the only thing she could feel was the phantom pressure of Elias Thorne's hand on her waist, and the realization that the man she thought was a monster was the only thing standing between her and a shallow grave. The gray mare was fast. Clara rode until her lungs burned and her legs went numb. She didn't take the main road to her ranch. She followed Elias's instructions, heading up the treacherous switchbacks toward the old mining ridge. This was desolate country, full of abandoned shafts and rattlesnakes. She found a collapsed miner's shack near the summit and waited. The sun began to set, painting the Wyoming sky in bruised purples and bloody oranges. The temperature dropped rapidly. Clara huddled in her shawl, gripping Henry's revolver, which she had taken from the saddlebag before leaving the livery. Why had he saved her? Elias Thorne was Vance's right hand. He had enforced evictions, broken up strikes at the coal mine, and collected debts with brutal efficiency. Why save a black widow with nothing to offer? The sound of hooves on shale broke the silence. Clara thumbed the hammer of the revolver back. Elias rode into the clearing. He was alone. He didn't approach the shack immediately. He circled the perimeter, checking for tracks, checking the wind. Only then did he dismount. He walked toward her, hands raised, palms open. "Put the gun down, Mrs. Daltrey. If I wanted you dead, you'd be at the bottom of the ravine with a broken neck." Clara didn't lower the weapon. "You work for him." "I work for money," Elias said, sitting down on a large rock near the shack's entrance. He took off his hat and rubbed his face. He looked exhausted. "And sometimes I work for a debt you don't know about." "What debt?" Elias looked at her, the moonlight highlighting the sharp angles of his face. "You don't remember me, do you?" Clara frowned. "I've never seen you before you rode onto my land." 10 years ago, Fort Robinson," Elias said quietly. "It was winter. A group of soldiers had a young brave cornered behind the supply wagons. They were drunk. They were going to kill him for sport." Clara's breath caught. She remembered. Henry had been a Buffalo soldier then, stationed at Robinson. She was the laundress. "Henry stopped them," Clara whispered. "He stepped in. He told them they'd have to go through him to get the boy. He took a beating for it, but the boy got away." Elias pointed to himself. "I was the boy." Clara lowered the gun slowly. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The scrawny, terrified boy with the bloody nose. Was this mountain of a man? "I tracked Henry down 6 months ago," Elias said, his voice hardening. "I wanted to thank him. I found out he was in Copper Creek. But by the time I got here, Vance had already made his move." "You mean the accident?" "It wasn't an accident," Elias said. "I found the man who did it. A drifter named Cole. Vance paid him $50 to hold Henry underwater." Clara let out a choked sob, covering her mouth with her hand. "You knew? And you still work for him?" "I couldn't save Henry," Elias said, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying light. "So I did the next best thing. I got close to the man who ordered it. I became Vance's dog. I let them call me Savage. I let them think I was their creature, because I needed to know where the bodies were buried." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded, oil-stained paper. "This is what Vance is really after. It's not about your house, Clara. It's about the water rights." Clara took the paper. It was a geological survey. "I don't understand." "The railroad is coming," Elias explained. "Not the spur line they talked about. The main transcontinental connector. It's coming right through the valley. They need water for the steam engines. Your creek, that little dried-up bed, it sits on top of the largest aquifer in the county. Vance knows it. If he gets your land, he sells the water rights to the Union Pacific for millions." "He killed Henry for water?" Clara asked, her voice trembling with rage. "He killed Henry for power," Elias corrected. "And he'll kill you for the same reason. That saddle cinch today? That was just the start. Tonight, his men are riding to your ranch. They're going to burn it down. They want to make it look like you fled the fire and died in the wilderness. Clara stood up. We have to go back. We have to stop them. Elias shook his head. No. Let them burn it. What? If they think you're dead, they get sloppy, Elias said. Vance has a ledger, Clara. Not the one you have, a real one. He keeps it in a safe at the bank. It lists every bribe, every murder, every stolen acre, including the payment to the man who killed Henry. We go to the sheriff, Clara said. Park is in the book, Elias replied grimly. There is no law here, Clara, not for you, and not for me. He stood up and walked over to her. The intimidating wolf was gone. In his place was a warrior preparing for a final battle. We have to burn Vance down, Elias said. Not his house, his life. We're going to steal that ledger. But to do that, you have to be a ghost. For the next 3 days, Clara Daltrey is dead. From the ridge, they watched the smoke rise. It was midnight when the orange glow lit up the valley floor. Clara watched her home. The home Henry had built, beam by beam, turned into a pyre. The distance muted the sound, but she could imagine the crackle of the timber, the shattering of the windows. She didn't cry. The tears had dried up on the ride up the mountain. Now, there was only a cold, hollow space where her heart used to be, a space she was filling with plans for vengeance. They'll search the ruins in the morning, Elias said, feeding the small fire they had built inside the miner's shack. When they don't find a body, they'll assume you ran, or the fire consumed you completely. Vance will file the death certificate by noon. How do we get into the bank? Clara asked. It has a steel vault. Henry told me it came from Chicago. The vault is strong, Elias agreed. But the man with the key is weak. Abernathy? No, Vance's son. Julian. No, sorry. His name is Arthur. Arthur Vance. Clara knew Arthur. He was a soft man, unlike his father. He spent his time gambling in the back of the saloon and chasing showgirls. Arthur has a copy of the key, Elias said. He keeps it on a chain around his neck. He's terrified of his father, but he's more terrified of debt. He owes the Cheyenne Club in Cheyenne City $2,000. How do you know all this? I told you, Elias said, checking the cylinder of his Colt. I listen. People don't mind talking in front of the Indian. They think I don't understand the complexities of their business. They think I'm just a gun. The plan was dangerous, insanely so. The next day, Elias rode back into town. He had to maintain his cover. He reported to Vance that Clara had likely perished in the fire or fled the territory. Vance was ecstatic. He paid Elias a bonus, $50 gold, which Elias took without a smile. Clara remained in the cave, practicing with the heavy revolver. She was no stranger to shooting. Henry had taught her to hunt rabbits and defend against coyotes. But shooting a man was different. On the second night, Elias returned with supplies, men's clothing, a wide-brimmed hat, and black soot for camouflage. Tonight is the poker tournament at the saloon, Elias said. Arthur will be there. He'll be drunk. I'll be guarding the back door. You're going to come in through the supply hatch in the cellar. Me? Clara asked. Why not you? Because Vance watches me, Elias said. If I leave my post, he gets suspicious. But nobody looks at the swampers or the delivery boys. You're going to cut the lights. And then I take the key from Arthur in the confusion. But I need a distraction big enough to clear the room. Clara looked at the dynamite stick in Elias's hand. You want me to blow up the saloon? Just the outhouse, Elias smirked. A rare, genuine expression that made him look 10 years younger. It'll smell terrible, but it won't kill anyone. While everyone is rushing out to see the explosion, I grab Arthur. It was a chaotic plan, relying on panic and luck. But it was all they had. The Golden Nugget Saloon was a festering wound in the center of Copper Creek, bleeding noise and yellow lamplight into the dark street. To Clara, crouching in the alleyway behind the building, it sounded like a beast breathing. The rhythmic stomp of boots on floorboards, the discordant jangle of a piano, and the roar of drunken laughter. She adjusted the oversized Stetson hat Elias had stolen for her. It smelled of stale sweat and horsehair, but it pulled low enough to hide her face. She wore a pair of canvas trousers held up by suspenders and a heavy woolen coat that swallowed her figure. To anyone passing by, in the dim light, she was just another drifter, down on his luck and looking for a scraps. "Remember?" Elias's voice was a whisper from the shadows beside her. "The fuse on the dynamite is cut short. You light it, you count to 5, you throw it in the cesspit, and you run. Do not look back." "And Arthur?" Clara asked, her voice muffled by the high collar of the coat. "Arthur is at the high-stakes table near the back. I'll be watching. When the blast hits, the room will surge forward. Arthur will panic. I'll relieve him of the key before he hits the floor." Clara looked at Elias. He had abandoned his usual stoic armor. His eyes were scanning the street, his body coiled like a spring. He was risking everything: his life, his freedom, for a woman he owed a decade-old debt. "Be careful, Elias." He didn't answer, just nodded once and slipped away into the darkness, moving toward the front entrance where he would take up his post as the loyal watchdog. Clara moved to the rear of the building. The smell hit her first, the overwhelming stench of the outhouses combined with the rotting garbage from the saloon's kitchen. She found the ventilation hatch to the cellar, just as Elias had described. It was loose. She pried it open, the rusted hinges groaning softly, a sound that seemed deafening to her heightened senses. She dropped into the cellar. It was cool and smelled of damp earth and beer kegs. Above her, the floorboards creaked under the weight of the revelry. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light falling through the cracks. She navigated the maze of barrels until she found the rear exit that led to the enclosed yard where the outhouses stood. She pushed the door open. The yard was empty. She pulled the stick of dynamite from her coat pocket. Her hands were trembling so badly she nearly dropped the match. She struck it against the rough wood of the doorframe. The flame flared, blue and orange in the night. For Henry. She lit the fuse. It hissed, a serpentine sound that cut through the noise of the piano. 1, 2, 3. She tossed the stick into the deep pit of the latrine and scrambled back through the cellar door, slamming it shut and diving behind a stack of whiskey crates. Boom! The explosion wasn't a sharp crack. It was a dull, heaving thud that shook the very foundation of the building. The smell of sewage and sulfur instantly flooded the air. Above her, the piano stopped abruptly. Then came the shouting. "Gas!" someone screamed. "The boiler!" The stampede was instantaneous. The floorboards thundered as 50 men tried to exit through 2 doors. Clara waited for the count of 10, then kicked the cellar door open and climbed out into the alley. Chaos reigned in the street. Smoke billowed from the back of the saloon. Men were coughing, cursing, and stumbling into the road. Clara kept her head down, moving against the flow of the crowd, making her way toward the bank. It was 2 blocks down, sitting in ominous silence, while the rest of the town burned with panic. She reached the side door of the bank, the shadows clinging to her like a second skin. A moment later, Elias appeared. He wasn't running. He was walking with a terrifying calm, supporting a coughing, dazed Arthur Vance. "Easy, Mr. Vance," Elias was saying, his voice thick with faux concern. "Let's get you some air." He guided the young man to a water trough. As Arthur leaned over to retch, Elias's hand moved with the speed of a magician. He patted Arthur's back with one hand, while the other slashed a small knife across the silver chain around Arthur's neck. The key dropped into Elias's palm. "Stay here, sir. I'll go find the sheriff," Elias said. Arthur waved a hand weakly. "Go. Just get me some whiskey." Elias turned and walked toward Clara. He didn't speak. He just held up the key. It glinted in the moonlight like a promise. They moved to the bank's rear entrance. The key slid into the lock with a heavy clunk. Elias turned it, and the door swung inward. The bank lobby was a tomb of polished mahogany and brass. The silence was heavy, pressurized. They moved behind the teller's cages to the heavy steel door of the vault. "This is it," Elias whispered. "The key opens the outer lock, but there's a combination." "You said you knew it," Clara hissed, panic flaring. "I know 3 numbers," Elias said. "Vance changes the last one every week based on the date. Today is the 12th. Try 12. Elias inserted the key and turned the heavy handle. It clanked. He spun the dial, left to 20, right to 45, left to 10. He paused. Right to... He spun it to 12. He tried the handle. Locked. "Damn it," Elias cursed softly. "Think," Clara whispered. "Vance is a narcissist. He doesn't care about the date. He cares about his achievements." "His birthday?" "No," Clara said, her mind racing back to the conversation she had overheard Vance having with Henry before things turned sour. "The day he founded the bank. He bragged about it. He said it was the day civilization came to this valley." "I don't know the date," Elias said, sweat beading on his forehead. "I do," Clara said. "We arrived here a month after. It was July 4th. He opened it on Independence Day to mock the government regulations." 4, Elias said. He spun the dial back, right to 4. The tumblers clicked, a sound sweeter than any music Clara had ever heard. Elias pulled the handle. The massive door groaned and swung open. Inside, shelves were stacked with canvas bags of coins and stacks of bills. But they ignored the money. Elias went straight to the small iron shelf in the back. There it was, a black leather-bound ledger. Elias grabbed it and flipped it open. "This is it, the payroll, the bribes." He turned a page. "Here, payment to C for services rendered, removal of H. Daltrey, $50. Clara felt her knees buckle. Seeing it in ink, her husband's life, valued at $50, broke something inside her, but it also forged the pieces into steel. "We have him," she whispered. "Not yet," Elias said, closing the book. "We have the proof. Now we need to survive the night." Suddenly, the front door of the bank rattled. Voices came from the street. "I saw a light, Sheriff, inside the vault." Sheriff Park. Elias extinguished their lantern instantly. "They saw the reflection," he cursed. "There's no back way out of the vault without crossing the lobby. We're trapped." Clara gripped the handle of Henry's revolver. "We fight." "No," Elias said, his mind working furiously. "If we shoot, we die. And the book disappears. We need a distraction." He looked at the shelves of money. "How much do you think is in here?" "Thousands," Clara said. Elias grabbed a canvas sack of silver dollars. "Greed," he said. "It's the only thing stronger than their loyalty to Vance." He dragged the heavy sack to the vault door. When I open this, I'm going to slide this sack across the lobby floor. It'll spill. While they're looking at the money, we go through the window in the manager's office. That's suicide, Clara said. It's poker, Elias corrected. He cracked the vault door. Ready? He shoved the sack. It slid across the polished floor, hitting the leg of a desk and bursting open. Hundreds of silver dollars scattered with a cacophony of ringing metal. What in the... Park's voice shouted from the front. Flashlights swept the room, beams catching the glittering coins. For 3 seconds, the deputies froze, their eyes drawn irresistibly to the fortune on the floor. Go! Elias hissed. They bolted to the left, diving into Vance's private office. Elias smashed the window with his elbow. He boosted Clara through, then vaulted after her, landing in the alleyway just as gunshots shattered the rest of the glass behind them. They're on us, Elias shouted. To the horses. They rode hard, not stopping until they reached the dense tree line of the Blackwood Forest, 10 miles north of town. The horses were blown, their sides heaving in the cold night air. Clara slid from the saddle and collapsed onto the pine needles. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She clutched the ledger to her chest as if it were a holy relic. Elias dismounted and immediately began covering their tracks, sweeping the pine needles with a branch. When he was satisfied, he sat opposite her, lighting a small, smokeless fire in a hollow beneath a rock overhang. We can't go to the marshal in Cheyenne, Elias said, staring into the small flame. Vance has men on the road. They'll be waiting for us. So what do we do? Clara asked. We can't live in the woods forever. We don't have to, Elias said. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, a flyer he had torn from the wall of the saloon before the explosion. He smoothed it out on the ground. Grand Memorial Service. For the late Clara Daltrey, Sunday, 10 a.m., Copper Creek Town Square, officiated by Mayor Thaddeus Vance. Clara stared at the paper. He's holding a funeral for me? He's cementing the narrative, Elias said. Once he buries an empty coffin and gives a tearful speech, you are legally dead. The property transfers to the bank immediately. He sells the water rights on Monday morning. He's going to stand there and lie to God and everyone, Clara said, her voice trembling with fury. He's done it before, Elias said, but look at the bottom. Clara squinted at the fine print. Special guest, Governor William Sterling, and the board of the Union Pacific Railroad. The governor is coming? Vance wants to show off, Elias explained. He wants to sign the deal with the railroad right there, in front of the governor, to show how efficient he is. He's turning your funeral into a business merger. Clara looked up, her eyes locking with Elias's. That's his mistake. It's a trap, Elias warned. The square will be full of armed men. Park, Skinner, all of them. But the governor will be there, Clara said, and the press from Cheyenne. Vance can't shoot us in front of the governor. He might try, Elias said grimly. Then we make sure he can't, Clara said. She opened the ledger. We don't just show up. We destroy him. They spent the next 2 days in the cave, not sleeping, just planning. Clara went through the ledger line by line. She found more than just Henry's murder. She found evidence of voter fraud, embezzlement of territorial funds, and a scheme to defraud the very railroad executives coming to the ceremony. He's been skimming off the top of the railroad bonds, Clara said, pointing to a column of figures. He's stealing from the Union Pacific. That, Elias said, a slow smile spreading across his face, is even better than murder. The railroad doesn't care about lives, but they care about their money. If we show them this, they'll hang him themselves. Sunday morning dawned, with a sky the color of bruised iron. The wind was howling down from the peaks, whipping the dust through the streets of Copper Creek. The town square was draped in black bunting. A podium had been erected in front of the church. Hundreds of people were gathered, townsfolk, ranch hands, and a delegation of men in expensive suits standing near a polished carriage, Governor Sterling and the railroad tycoons. Thaddeus Vance stood at the podium, looking solemn and distinguished in a black frock coat. Beside him stood Sheriff Park, his hand resting on his gun, scanning the crowd. "Friends," Vance bellowed, his voice carrying over the wind, "we gather today to mourn a tragedy." Clara Daltrey was a troubled woman, a woman who couldn't accept the hand of friendship this town offered her. In her grief, she allowed her home to be consumed by fire and perished within it. He paused for effect, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "But from tragedy comes renewal," Vance continued, pivoting seamlessly to his sales pitch. "The Daltrey land will now serve a greater purpose. It will quench the thirst of the iron horses that will build our future." The railroad men nodded approvingly. "I have the deed here," Vance said, lifting a document. "And with the governor as my witness, I sign this transfer." Crack. The sound of a gunshot split the air. It didn't hit anyone. It struck the wooden sign above the bank across the square, shattering it. The crowd screamed and ducked. Sheriff Park drew his weapon, spinning around. "Who fires?" Vance shouted, his face reddening. "I object to the transfer," a voice boomed. From the roof of the livery stable, overlooking the square, a figure stood up. It was Elias Thorne. He held a Winchester rifle, aimed not at Vance, but at the deed on the podium. "Thorne!" Vance screamed. "You traitor! Sheriff, shoot him!" "Hold your fire!" Governor Sterling shouted, stepping forward. "What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning is fraud, Governor," Elias called out, "and murder." "He's lying," Vance yelled. "He's a disgruntled employee, a savage." "If I'm a liar," Elias said, his voice calm and carrying, "then who is standing behind you?" Vance turned. The crowd gasped. A collective intake of breath sucked the air out of the square. Walking up the center aisle of the crowd, dressed not in widow's weeds, but in the clean, sharp clothes of a rancher, pants, a white shirt, and a heavy coat, was Clara Daltrey. She didn't look down. She didn't look afraid. She looked like a queen walking to her coronation. "Mrs. Daltrey?" the governor stammered. "We were told you were dead." "I was, Governor," Clara said, her voice ringing clear. She stopped 10 feet from the podium. "But Mr. Vance has a habit of burying things before they are done breathing." "She's an imposter," Vance shrieked, panic cracking his voice. "Arrest her. She's trespassing." Sheriff Park took a step toward her, his gun raised. "You heard him. Get on your knees, Clara." "I wouldn't." Elias's voice floated down from the roof. He racked the lever of his rifle. "The next shot won't miss, Josiah." Park froze. Clara reached into her coat and pulled out the black ledger. "Thaddeus Vance claims this land is his," Clara said, holding the book up for the railroad men to see. "But this book says he paid $50 to a man named Cole to drown my husband. It says he paid Sheriff Park $200 a month to look the other way." She turned to the railroad executives. "And on page 42, gentlemen, it shows where he embezzled $15,000 from your bond issue to build his own mansion." The lead railroad executive, a stern man named Harriman, stepped forward. His face was purple. "Let me see that book." No. Vance lunged for Clara. It was a desperate, animalistic move. He pulled a derringer from his sleeve. Clara, get down! Elias shouted. Clara dropped to the dirt. A gunshot rang out, then another. Vance staggered back, clutching his shoulder, but he hadn't been hit by Elias. Smoke curled from the barrel of Sheriff Park's gun. The sheriff stood there, his face pale. He looked at the governor, then at Vance. He made a calculation in that split second. Vance was finished, and Park wasn't going down with him. He pulled a gun on a woman, Park stammered, trying to salvage his own skin. I had to stop him. Vance fell to his knees, blood seeping through his fingers. He looked at Clara, his eyes wide with shock. You, he wheezed. You were nobody. Clara stood up, brushing the dust from her knees. She walked over to him, looking down with pity, not hate. I was Henry Daltrey's wife, she said softly, and that was enough. Elias slid down the ladder of the livery stable and walked through the parting crowd. He came to stand beside Clara. He didn't smile. He just nodded to the governor. The book is all yours, Governor, Elias said. I suggest you read the section on the sheriff, too, before he leaves town. Park dropped his gun, realizing his betrayal had bought him nothing. As the governor's men moved to secure the ledger and arrest the bleeding banker, Clara looked at Elias. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling again. Is it over? She whispered. Elias looked at the hills, at the land that was hers again. The war is over, he said, but the winter is coming. He turned to walk away. Where are you going? Clara asked, panic rising in her chest. I did what I promised, Elias said. I paid my debt to Henry, a man like me. I don't belong in a town like this when the shooting stops. Elias, she called out. He stopped, but didn't turn around. You don't have a debt to Henry anymore, she said, but you might have a future with this land. I need a foreman, someone who knows the wolves. Elias stood still for a long time. The wind tugged at his long coat. Finally, he turned back. The hard lines of his face softened. I'm expensive, he said. Clara smiled, the first genuine smile in 6 months. I know a bank that's hiring. I think I can afford you. The shooting in the town square was over in seconds, but the war for Clara's future was only just beginning. In the American West of 1883, truth was often a casualty of procedure, and justice was a commodity bought by the highest bidder. Thaddeus Vance did not die. The bullet from Sheriff Park's gun had shattered his clavicle and punctured a lung. But Vance was a man of spiteful vitality. He survived the surgery in the back room of the barber surgeon's shop and was transported under guard to the Territorial Prison Hospital in Cheyenne. For Clara and Elias, the weeks that followed were a different kind of torture. They were no longer running from bullets. They were running through a maze of red tape. The governor had seized the bank's assets, freezing the Daltrey accounts along with Vance's illicit funds. Clara was land rich, but cash poor. The ranch was a ruin of charred timber and ash. Winter had settled in with a vengeance, the kind of Wyoming winter that froze the breath in your throat before you could speak. They lived in the small foreman's shack that had miraculously survived the fire. It was a single room with a potbelly stove. Elias slept on a bedroll near the door, his Winchester always within reach. Clara took the narrow cot in the corner. The propriety of the arrangement scandalized the remaining decent folks of Copper Creek. A black widow living with a half-breed gunman. The whispers in the general store were venomous. Let them talk, Elias said, one evening, sharpening his axe by the firelight. Sheep always bleat when they see a wolf. It's not just talk, Elias, Clara said, looking up from the mending pile. The grocer charged me double for flour today. He said there's a risk tax for serving people involved in federal investigations. Elias stopped sharpening. I'll pay him a visit tomorrow. No, Clara said firmly. No more threats. We do this the right way. We wait for the trial. The trial was set for February in Cheyenne City. Judge Isaac H. Parker, a man known for his hanging rope, but also his strict adherence to the letter of the law, was presiding. Vance had hired a lawyer from Chicago, a man named Clement Sterling, no relation to the governor, who wore suits of Italian silk and had a smile like a viper. The courtroom was packed. It smelled of wet wool, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. Clara sat at the plaintiff's table, looking small but dignified in a borrowed gray dress. Elias sat in the gallery, his dark eyes fixed on the back of Vance's head. Vance sat in a wheelchair, his arm in a sling, playing the part of the frail, victimized elder statesman. The prosecutor, a young and overwhelmed territorial attorney named Jeremiah Black, laid out the evidence, the ledger, the testimony of the railroad executives, the witnessed attempt on Clara's life. It seemed open and shut. But Clement Sterling was worth every penny Vance paid him. Objection, Sterling drawled, standing up during the cross-examination of Clara. The witness claims this ledger proves my client paid for the murder of her husband. Yet who found this ledger? I did, Clara said, with the help of Elias Thorne. Ah, yes, Mr. Thorne, Sterling smiled, turning to the jury. A man with a known criminal record in 3 territories. A man who, by his own admission, hated Mr. Vance. Is it not possible, Mrs. Daltrey, that Mr. Thorne forged these entries to frame a prominent businessman? The handwriting matches Vance's, Clara argued. Handwriting can be mimicked, Sterling countered. And let's look at the entry regarding your husband's death. Payment to C. Who is C? We have no body. We have no confession. We have only a letter in a book found by a known enemy of the defendant. The courtroom murmured. Sterling was dismantling the truth, piece by piece. He painted Vance not as a murderer, but as a victim of a conspiracy between a disgruntled employee and a desperate widow. Then came the twist that nearly ended it all. On the 3rd day of the trial, Sterling called a surprise witness. The defense calls Mr. Cole to the stand. Clara gasped. Elias, in the gallery, went rigid. Cole was the drifter Elias had claimed killed Henry. They thought he had fled the territory or died in a drunken brawl. A rough-looking man shuffled to the stand. He looked like he had been pulled out of a gutter, cleaned up, and shoved into a suit. Mr. Cole, Sterling said, did Thaddeus Vance pay you $50 to kill Henry Daltrey? Cole looked at the jury, his eyes watery and shifty. No, sir. Did you ever meet Thaddeus Vance? Never in my life, sir. Then why is your name associated with this crime? Cole pointed a shaking finger at the gallery, at Elias. Because he told me to say it, Cole lied. That Indian fellow, Thorne, he found me in a saloon in Laramie, put a gun to my head, told me if I didn't say Vance paid me, he'd kill me. He wanted to shake down the bank. The courtroom erupted. Elias stood up, his hand going instinctively to his hip, though he was unarmed. You liar! Order! Order! Judge Parker banged his gavel. Mr. Thorne, sit down, or I will have you removed. Elias sat, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He looked at Clara. Her face was pale. They were losing. The truth was being rewritten in real time. That night, in the boarding house where they were staying, the mood was funereal. "He bought coal," Elias said, pacing the small room. "Vance must have money stashed somewhere we didn't find. He paid Cole to lie. Without Cole's confession, the murder charge won't stick," Clara said, staring out the window at the snowy street. "He might get time for embezzlement, but he'll be out in 5 years, and he'll come for us." "Not if I get to him first," Elias growled. "No," Clara turned to him. "If you kill him, you prove them right. You prove you're the savage they say you are." "Then what do we do?" Elias asked, throwing his hands up. "The law is a game, Clara, and we don't know the rules." "We don't play their game," Clara said, a dangerous light entering her eyes. "We change the board." She went to her bag and pulled out a small, unassuming document. It wasn't the ledger. It was a letter. "I found this inside the cover of the ledger," Clara said. "I didn't think it was important. It's a letter from Vance to his son, Arthur." Elias took it. "What does it say?" "It's not about the money," Clara said. "It's about the land. Specifically, the survey markers." Clara pointed to a paragraph. "Arthur, make sure the surveyor moves the markers on the Daltrey plot 10 degrees north. If the discrepancy is discovered, blame the old 1860 survey. We need that creek bed included in the purchase." "He admitted to altering federal land boundaries," Elias said. "That's a federal crime. But how does that help with the murder?" "It doesn't," Clara said. "But look at the date on the letter, July 12th. 2 days before Henry died," Elias noted. "And look at where he says he's writing from," Clara pointed. "Written from the Union Pacific Club, Cheyenne." Elias looked up, confused. "So, during the trial yesterday, Vance testified he was in Copper Creek all that week, nursing a sick horse. His alibi for not meeting Cole was that he never left his ranch." Elias smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "He perjured himself." "If he lied about where he was," Clara said, "then his alibi for the murder timeline crumbles. And if we can prove he was in Cheyenne—" "The club records," Elias finished. "The Union Pacific keeps a guest book." It was a long shot. They had 12 hours before the closing arguments. Elias went out into the blizzard. He didn't go to the club as a guest. He went to the back alley. He found a porter taking out the ash. He didn't use threats. He used the last of the money Clara had, a gold locket she had pawned. He returned at dawn, frozen half to death, clutching a page torn from a guest registry. The next morning, when Jeremiah Black presented the rebuttal, the atmosphere in the court shifted. "The defense claims Mr. Vance was in Copper Creek," Black announced, holding up the page. "But the Union Pacific Club registry places him here, in Cheyenne, meeting with Mr. Cole." There it was. Cole's name was right below Vance's. Vance had signed Cole in as a guest. Sterling's face went white. Vance, in his wheelchair, looked like he had swallowed glass. The lie collapsed. If Vance and Cole were together in Cheyenne, Cole's testimony that they had never met was perjury. And if Cole was lying about that, he was lying about the murder. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. The verdict: guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree. Embezzlement. Perjury. Judge Parker didn't hesitate. "Thaddeus Vance, you have used the instruments of civilization, the bank, the pen, the law, to commit acts of barbarism. You are sentenced to hang by the neck until dead." As the bailiffs hauled a screaming Vance away, Clara didn't cheer. She just closed her eyes and let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 6 months. She felt a hand on her shoulder. "Elias, let's go home." he said. 3 years had turned the charred ruins of the Daltrey homestead into the valley's envy. The new barn stood stark white against the Wyoming sky, a monument to survival. Clara Daltrey sat on her wraparound porch, no longer the pariah of Copper Creek, but a formidable landowner who commanded respect even from those who once spat at her shadow. Elias Thorne rode in from the tree line, the heavy gait of his horse kicking up dust. He dismounted with a slight limp, a souvenir from a blizzard rescue the winter prior. He joined Clara on the porch, the silence between them comfortable, forged in fire. Arthur Vance was begging for drinks at the saloon again, Elias noted quietly. The town ignores him. He's a ghost, Clara replied, pouring Elias a lemonade. We're the living. Elias looked out at the horizon, his dark eyes unreadable. Slowly, he pulled a small velvet box from his duster. Inside lay a silver star, a U.S. Deputy Marshal's badge. Cheyenne wants a man who knows the wolves, Elias said. They offered me the territory. Clara's heart seized for a moment. So, you're leaving? I told them I have a prior obligation, Elias said, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. I told them I'm the foreman of the Daltrey Ranch first. I'll marshal part-time. Someone has to keep the peace when the law fails. Clara laughed, a sound of pure relief. Just be back for supper, Marshal. Elias pinned the star to his vest, right beside the leather thong of his ancestors. He was no longer just a Cherokee outcast or the hired gun. He was the guardian of the valley. Yes, ma'am, he said, tipping his hat. Clara watched him look out over the land they had saved. They hadn't just survived the West, they had tamed it. And that is how Clara Daltrey and Elias Thorne rewrote the history of Copper Creek. They proved that in a land built on gunpowder and greed, the most dangerous weapon of all was the truth, and the courage to stand your ground when the whole world tells you to run. If you enjoyed this story of justice in the Wild West, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a saga. And tell me in the comments, do you think Elias should have taken the marshal job or stayed on the ranch full time? I read every comment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.